Okay. Well, we've got about 24 seconds before we start. So I'll welcome all of you who are coming in, and you are in session 2. The workshop is Meeting in a Digital World, which based on the technical glitches that I've encountered is something that I need to see as well. So I think I'm going to introduce Debbie and let her tell us what we're going to be learning today, and appreciate so much her being a part of this virtual experience. So I can't think of a more appropriate session for today than Meeting in a Digital World. So take it away, Debbie.
That is for sure. Well, thank you for having me. I think we can start, just kind of dive right in with my slides if you have those.
I will get those.
Awesome. So for those of you who don't know me, I am with Fitzgerald Peterson Communications. We are McDonald's public relations agency, and we have worked with Colorado PTA for 16 years. So when my agency got the business with McDonald's, we came up with several ideas because they wanted to support the community. And we thought, oh my goodness, what better way to support the community than support the PTA? And what an incredible journey it has been. And just seeing everything the PTA does for teachers, parents, and students is truly, truly enlightening and inspirational. So some of you I've known for 16 years, others are just knowing me now. And so I definitely probably am fairly seasoned in meetings and presentations and media training and messaging, because I come from a media background where I used to be an anchor reporter, and then I went on to a national agency out of New York where we trained CEOs in Fortune 500 companies and how to speak to the media. That kind of parlayed into presentation training and all kinds of communications training. So this has been, are you sick of hearing about our unprecedented times? Well, it has been unprecedented. And I don't think digital meetings are going away. So tips and tricks for the best presentations. You can use some of these tools also for presentations in person. So there's a lot of tips and tricks that you can use definitely for that as well. So you can start on that next slide. Who am I? I think I just explained that, so you can go on. Virtual meetings. Again, I know in my business, we have clients saying, you know what, we're not going to up our lease. Everyone's going to work from home. We're saving money. People are effective, and we don't have to hop on a plane and go do a presentation for 10 minutes across the country. We can hop on a Zoom and be just as effective, or maybe more so save a lot of money and be almost as effective, right? So the pandemic has shown us that virtual meetings are cheaper, easier, and quicker. Yes, meeting in person, we want to get back to that too. But again, I don't think these virtual meetings are going away. Next slide. So the first step in your meeting is to pick your digital meeting platform. So Zoom, WebEx, Cvent, GoToMeetings, FaceTime. You know, there's many different options out there. Always pick the one that you feel you can really manage. Some have more technical issues to work through. So we certainly use Zoom a lot, and FaceTime even sometimes. And we were even finding that the media were using Zoom and FaceTime for interviews. So the interviews we pitched about our clients often now are virtual. And again, probably not going away for every instance. Second step, decide your topic, your speakers, and how much audience interaction you want to have. So yes, they can be talking heads, and I'm sure all of us have been on many virtual meetings where it's just talking heads. It's always nice to have a few visuals and some interaction, maybe a few speakers. Next slide. So third step, create an interesting visual presentation. Make your virtual meeting more than just talking heads. So If you know, have words on the screen, that's one thing. You can certainly use even clip art sometimes breaks it up a little bit. Video is always a good way to bring your presentations to life. Maybe it's someone speaking about their experience on the topic that you're presenting. Photos always make a great visual. But I guess my point is, people are kind of sick of the talking head, and you're probably getting kind of tired of the Zoom meeting. But there are ways to break this up and make it a little bit more interesting. I've even had clients wear costumes and do silly things. Certainly not always appropriate for every meeting, but people are getting a little tired of it. So any way you can break it up to make it interesting for people is kind of fun. All right, next slide. No problem. And you know what? Actually, that's a good point, Lisa. Things happen and you go with the flow, right?
That's why I did that.
No big deal. Perfect timing. Really, it's true. I can't tell you how many presentations. As a matter of fact, I was on one the other day. You'd think my husband would know by now what I'm doing in my office. And he comes around to the back here to get something from this filing cabinet in front of 200 McDonald's people. I'm like, what in the world? Well, everyone made light of it. They're like, clearly he doesn't listen to you. I'm like, well, obviously. Anyway, preparing for a presentation is really important. Know your message and goals. Go into a meeting knowing what you want your audience to get out of it. Always budget to a specific time. Never good to have an open-ended meeting. Not that you would, but I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in that could end in about a half hour that go on for 2. People are getting a little bit exhausted by online meetings. So stick to that budget. You're going to be more effective. And then if there is more to talk about, schedule a separate time to either speak with that person or schedule another meeting. Always prepare ahead of time and practice. You know, it's not natural for some people to do presentations in front of other people. I happen to love it because it's my love language, but it isn't natural for everyone. Not everyone loves speaking in front of a group, but practice makes perfect. And it's really true. Get your messages, practice, and run through it a couple times, maybe even record it. No one loves to see themselves on recording, but it really does help. And when you send the link to participants, make sure that you're not sending a link to any of your presentations in a public forum. My kids had a situation at their school where someone hacked into their Zoom. And so early on, we realized, wow, this can really happen. And sometimes it's not so great what these hackers are doing. So make sure that when you send the link, it is to a group of people that can't share it or they understand it's not shareable. This is something that really you need to make sure people understand. Next slide. So next steps is just general presentation tips. Also things to tell your attendees. Just some etiquette that makes your meeting so much easier. Mute your microphone. Be mindful of background noise. I know how many of us have been on Zooms where there's babies crying or dogs barking. Hey, it happens. It's not a big deal. But if it's constant, it can get annoying. So, you know, making sure that your family maybe knows that you're on a presentation. If you have kids at home, if you have a dog, maybe they need to go downstairs in the closet for a minute or in a bedroom for a minute. Position your camera properly. Make sure that you do have some good lighting. If your webcam is focused at eye level, it's better. It creates a little bit more of a sense of engagement with other participants. They do make you feel then like you are being listened to and spoken to. And then it is nice for attendees also maybe a reminder, hey, if you can have your video on, if that's something that you want, if you want it to be more interactive, if you want to keep questions until the end, make sure that you know that for people. And I should have said that at the beginning. We're going to have questions at the end because then it kind of sets expectations. Limiting distractions. You can make it easier to focus on the meeting by just turning off all your notifications, closing your minimizing your apps, muting your smartphone. There's a lot of things that you can do to minimize some of the issues that might come up during a presentation. And it's things that sometimes we don't think about or we forget about, but it can really make your meeting go smoother. Avoid multitasking. This is something that I am accused of. I will admit it. and I have multitasks and Zoom meetings, and people know, and they probably are annoyed. So I've really tried to minimize that because I do know I want to be respectful of the person, giving the presentation. So minimize that multitasking. It's also really hard to multitask and give a presentation. So try not to do that. And then prepare materials in advance. We're going to really get into this a little bit more. But if you're sharing content during the meeting, make sure you have the files and links ready to go before the meeting starts. So you're not stressed out, you're not panicked. And this is a really good time to have written notes right in front of you. I have notes here on the side of my computer, so I can just glance down. I have notes. It's a great opportunity to have your messaging and the things that you want to really relay in your meeting right in front of you. There's really no excuse not to know your messaging because it's right there to the side of your camera, and you can cross points off the list as you make them. Next slide. So for the presenter, there's some fun things that you can do to make your presentation interactive. Use poll questions periodically to engage your audience. So if you have a long presentation and it is a couple hours and you think, gosh, or even an hour, I'm going to lose people. Maybe you put a poll up and you say, how many of you understood this content? Yes or no? What are the top 5 things you're already getting from this presentation? Monitor the chat function for questions. And I just was looking at the chat to see if we had any questions already. But monitor that. See if people are expounding on something you covered. See if someone's expressing poor understanding and says, well, wait a minute, could you go back to that slide? Because sometimes that really helps too, to just make sure that you're interacting with your audience through the chat. Make sure you don't have any misspellings in your presentation like I do in additional up there in my title. See, I did that as an example, of course, so you could see that. Enable video only for the presenter. Sometimes you can enable just video for the presenter. You can see a limited number of participants. So depending on your screen size, just know that video gobbles up a lot of network resources. So if you plan to lecture without feedback for a large seminar, you can disable all that other video, or you can kind of just have your screen up so other people aren't looking at interaction. You just have to know what you're trying to get across in your presentation and how you want that to look ahead of time. Schedule 1 or more feedback breaks. So in a physical room, you see raised hands, right? You observe confused looks. A lot of times on virtual presentations, you're just rattling on and you're not seeing how people are responding to your presentation, or maybe everyone have their video off. If it's an audio free-for-all, it can be a nightmare, but dedicated like Q&A sessions are good. So, maybe I'll stop right after these presentation tips and see if anyone has any questions about those presentation tips. It's just a break. It's a time when Q&A periods work, fairly well. Address internet disruptions. Network providers are seeing these massive increases in residential bandwidth. I see it in my own neighborhood where I know that's really great that we're having this today, actually, because there are times during the week when I do have some bandwidth issues because I happen to know that half my block is working from home, at least, maybe more. So we're all using this bandwidth, and, audio is kind of broken up sometimes. So is video. And it is frustrating if it's happening and you don't kind of stop and take a break and get it back on track. So yeah, that's a good thing to have. So yes, I'll stop now. Are there any questions about presentation tips? Since I use that as an example and I should be practicing what I preach. Anyone have any questions up until now? I don't see any.
Hey, Debbie.
Yes.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Where do you look? Do you look like I am, like right now looking at my camera, which feels really awkward because I'm staring at a little point? Yeah. Or do you look at your screen where you can see the people's faces, but you're not, it's a different engagement through a camera?
Yeah, I usually look at myself, at least on my own video. So I don't feel like I'm talking to nothing. And I pick a couple of people that I am talking to. Otherwise, it's really hard. You're kind of looking all over the screen and it's hard to make eye contact. So I usually do pick 1 or 2 people that I feel like I'm talking to, or I just talk directly into that camera, which I find that to be a little awkward too. So if I can feel like I'm talking to someone, it does feel a little bit better and it's a little bit more engaging, I think. So next slide, unless anyone else has a question. Well, plenty of time for questions after. So the one thing I want you all to get really used to doing when you do a presentation is to think about your elevator pitch. It's a snappy, clear answer to why you're holding the meeting or presentation. It imparts a sense of mission, and it says what sets this meeting apart, or what it sets you apart. So that's your headline. That's your headline. So today, my headline was virtual meetings, right? Tips and tricks for the best presentations. I will probably repeat this several times. Okay. Oh, good. I think someone put themselves on mute. That helped. Thank you. But that's your headline. And I think that if you go into a meeting with your headline, and then we'll talk about messaging, you're going to feel way more confident and you know your goal. Next slide. So this is how it looks. Really, for any meeting, you have about one headline and 3 or 4 top messages. Any more than that, you're going to lose people. So you set the stage there on the left with your headline, and then you have your 3 key messages. And yes, you might go through a few sub messages with those key messages, but your main messages are setting the stage with that headline, saying your 3 key messages, and restate and wrap back. You say that headline several times. And that's how news reporters do it. If you see, or politicians, man, they're great at this, right? They often, they don't sway. Even if someone asks them a question, they stick to their message. And sometimes it's actually annoying. But for a presentation, it's a good thing because you're hammering home that headline and those top 3 things you want everyone to walk away with. Next slide. Make sure you're, oh, that's awesome. That's true, Shauna. Hot tip for PTA moms, make sure your kids aren't on Netflix if you need to Zoom. I did see Kyle Clark at 9 News had that issue with his child. And then of course, we all saw the one where the little kid came in when the guy was doing his big Zoom with his executives. And that's kind of all what started it. I love that. So supporting your key messages. So you may have these 3 key messages. You want to use information that really distinguishes and adds credibility to those key messages. So maybe it's facts, plain statements, describing a circumstance or a condition, statistics, using effectively, they really can be a good way to support your message. So be very clear, 1 out of 3 rather than 33 1/3%, like making it very simple. But statistics can really drive your message home and give you some context with that. Quotes from experts, third-party statements add credibility to your presentation. So oftentimes when we're doing media training, we'll look up studies. You know, studies have shown that answering a media representative within the first 10 minutes of their request ensures that you'll have a good rapport with them and understanding their deadline. So things like that, when you are doing a presentation, really hits home. Analogy or comparison. Adding clarity to a story with an analogy or comparison just makes it a little bit more interesting, right? And brings your story to life. Personal experience is personally my best way of really understanding and having attendees relate to the message, right? And you all are PTA members, leaders in your schools, leaders in your family, awesome moms, awesome people who have great ideas. So your firsthand experience really can resonate well. You know, what I've seen work in my school is what we've done and what really is successful is really does help people when you're giving a presentation. It really drives home some of that messaging. Next slide. So tough questions, I believe, is next. Handling tough questions can be difficult. And as you might imagine, this is a little bit different when we are dealing with media, when we are doing media training for our clients, because tough questions can mean something awful that gets asked and then you get down the rabbit hole. But it's very similar in presentations. Not everyone's going to agree with you all the time. Not everyone's going to even follow protocol. So if you do get a question, which we call an attack, and it's not necessarily an attack, but it's a hard-hitting question, acknowledge, and then we bridge to your headline or wow statement. So if someone argues with you and says something like, oh, well, that's not how we do it in our school, you're going to end up being unsuccessful. Hey, I can respect your point of view, but what I do know in my experience is, and then that leads you to a wow statement, which is your headline and your wonderful messages, and you quickly conclude. That's another thing that we say in presentations is, it's nice to have a little give and take. It's nice to have a little bit of, if you are doing Q&A, that people respect that, yes, you're going to answer the question, but you might then wait for another question or comment, and it's a nice give and take. It also makes your presentations more interesting. So again, attack, handle those questions head on. Okay, I understand your point of view. However, what I'm here to talk about today is, and bridge to a wow statement in your messages. Quickly conclude and move on. Next slide. So bridging is something that, again, next slide. Yep, sorry about that. I'm sure it's stuck. No problem. Bridging is a technique to move from one aspect of an issue to another. It's truly something that our politicians and our leaders have perfected. And it involves dealing with the question briefly and honestly, but promptly following that up with your message, right? So yes, in addition to that, leads to a message. No, let me explain. But then you can transition to your headline and message. I would need to find the answer to that question, but what I do know is, and again, lead you to the positive messaging that you're there to relay. Some people love to get you off track, and some people don't mean to, but they ask you a question that has nothing to do with the content. Or you don't know the answer. It's perfectly okay and even better for you to say, I don't have an answer to that question. What I'm here to talk about today is, or that's kind of irrelevant to what we're talking about today. I can talk to you about that offline later. What I'd like to talk to you about today is, and bridge to a positive message, or a message that you know you want to get across in your presentation. Next slide. Another technique that we talk about in presentation training is flagging. So flagging is a technique that I used a lot when I was a TV reporter. And it's almost unconscious sometimes when people do this and you don't realize people are doing this, but it makes you realize what the most important parts of the presentation are. It's a way to help your audience remember your message by emphasizing or prioritizing what you consider to be the most important. So things like, the most important thing to remember today is, I'm going to say that several times today. The most important thing today to remember is your headline, 3 key messages, because that prepares you for your presentation. I've talked about many issues today. I think it boils down to these 3 things. So as you can see, it's a technique. So your audience understands, oh, I'm getting a cue. That's the most important thing she wants me to get across in today's presentation. And it works. It works. When I was a TV reporter, I would use these techniques, and or my subject would use these techniques, and I would think, you know what, that's what the mayor wants me to know is the most important thing that he wants to get across today. Or, wow, that obviously is my headline. That makes a lot of sense. Let me make one thing clear. I'm sure we've all heard people say that, but it really does hit home what your presentation is about and what your key messages and your headlines are. Next slide. Message review. Messages should have the 3C. Jargon and acronyms. Don't we all have them in every organization? My goodness, McDonald's has so many acronyms. When I started with them, I was almost too embarrassed to ask what some of them were because there were so many. I felt like, oh, I should know these acronyms. But if you use jargon and acronyms in your presentations, you're going to lose people. Not everyone knows what your acronyms are. So spell it out every time. And yes, there are instances when you can say, okay, RMHC is one of those, Ronald McDonald House Charities. RMHC, RMHC, RMHC. Everyone says RMHC. And I've had people go, what's RMHC? RMHC. Hilarious. Okay. We're losing them, right? If we keep saying RMHC. So at the beginning of a presentation, I might say, I'm going to be saying RMHC. millions of times through this presentation, and that means Ronald McDonald House Charities. Even though co-PTA, we all know what PTA means. I had an owner operator the other day, because he has no kids. He had no idea what PT. He's like, what is PTA? What is PT? Parent Teacher Association. Oh gosh, I'm such an idiot. I should have known that. Well, not necessarily, because you don't have kids, and we always say it, we never explain it. So just make sure that you keep the jargon to a minimum and you explain those acronyms. And concise. Make sure to communicate your key messaging within 10 to 20 seconds. Yes, there might be a 45-second example of something you say, but when you say less, you are more in control and you can gauge your audience. I'm also very guilty of talking way too fast. So you can see sometimes I'm trying to control that, because I am like an auctioneer sometimes. And I've been told, slow down. I don't understand you. So I have to really think about that before I go into a presentation, slowing down, saying it concisely, making sure I'm interactive and using that. Now, you may not have an interactive presentation. You may be giving a presentation, but that doesn't mean you can't stick to your message, be in control, and speak at a pace where people aren't wondering what the heck is going on and why you're auctioning off something. Be consistent. Repetition is key. Do you notice how many times I've said repetition? Repetition's key with your messages. Headline, 3 to 4 key messages. Any more than that, you're going to lose them. And we've all been in presentations where we've walked out and we've said, I have no idea what I just heard. What was the goal? Why did that person talk and talk and talk and talk and have zero organization in their presentation? So it really does set your audience up for success. When you have your headline, you make it clear. And you can even say, my headline today is, and I'm going to be talking about several things today, and those top 3 things are, let's take each one individually and talk through them. Be organized. Then your audience knows exactly what they're supposed to get out of the presentation. Messages need to be repeated several times for understanding and impact. As a matter of fact, how many times do you think an advertiser needs to repeat something for us to buy something? Well, it's become about 10 times. It used to be 3 or 4, but there's so many messages inundating us right now, right? During this presentation, I've had about 3 things pop up on my computer I thought I turned off. So all of us are getting these messages, whether it be social media or kids out the door waving or the phone's on. So just make sure that you are repeating and being clear in your presentations. Next slide. Message review. If you are not passionate and emotional about your subject matter, your audience won't be either. Be passionate about your subject. If you do show video and you have photos and you have personal experiences and maybe some statistics, maybe a couple guest speakers even, hammering home those messages you want your audience to walk away from your presentation with, it's going to be a lot more effective than if you're sitting here in a really low place and you're not looking. It's really boring. I mean, been there. How boring, not fun. Be passionate and excited. If you're passionate and excited and you smile and you're happy and you're, maybe it's not a happy subject matter. Okay, that's an exception. But if you are energetic and you are excited about your subject matter, no matter what it is, your audience will be too. And share your personal story if you're comfortable with that. I know with my children in school, I have many stories of what has worked and what hasn't worked. Or as a leader, with my PR agency and doing these presentations, what works, what doesn't work. I share my personal story all the time. And I think it really fosters trust with the people that you're talking to, but it also really lets people know, hey, you're not alone. I am not a perfect presenter. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put a link in the chat box here at the end, and you're going to survey and you're going to tell me what I did wrong and what I could have done better. And that's good. We all need to improve. You can't take that personally. I always want to learn and grow, and you should too. So share your personal story. Be a little bit vulnerable. Sometimes that's scary for some of us, but it really does foster that give and take with your audience. People will remember the way they felt long after they forgot the facts, right? They'll think, wow, that Debbie, she's a little wacky. But that's okay, because maybe being a little crazy or being more outgoing or being kind of excited about my subject matter, you'll actually remember me and remember one or two messages that I gave you today, instead of just saying, ugh, that was boring, never doing that again. So it's always good to make people feel a certain way over worrying, oh my gosh, I didn't get the 5,000 messages that I wanted to get in this presentation. Nope. Headline, 3 messages, passion. If you take that away today, you're going to kick butt on your next presentation. So remember, stick to your top 3 to 5 messages. Decide on your messages ahead of time based on the audience. I write those down, and this is what we do for clients. We do a messaging matrix where we have the headline, 3 messages, and maybe what you are supporting with those messages. You think about statistics, personal stories, maybe another speaker, maybe supporting video, maybe you have photos, but decide on those messages ahead of time and practice. If you go into a presentation and you know those messages, you are going to be 10 times more confident than you would have if you wing it. And even people who think, oh, I'm not winging it, but I know this stuff, I know it like the back of my hand. I'm telling you, you see 20 faces staring at you who want to get something out of a presentation, things can go downhill fast and you can get pretty nervous. So just having that in your backhand, in your back pocket. We even, for some clients, and if it's a big meeting, we laminate messaging and we have it on little cards. And we say, you know what, even if it's not a presentation, even if it's a board of directors and they want to remember messaging, like let's say they're at a networking event and they need to know what this organization is all about. And you want all of your members to have the same message about, let's say, your PTA and what you're doing and how exciting your capital fund drive is, let's say. Those top messages, if you have them written down for everyone and you practice and you do a little training, those folks will remember that and represent you well. Any more than 3 or 5 messages and you lose it. You lose them. You lose their attention. And then one thing that you can do ahead of time is test it out. I like to do focus groups sometimes with 1 or 2 friends who I know are going to be in the presentation. Does this resonate? Does this make sense to you? Am I not thinking of something that I should be thinking about giving this presentation? Is there something that you really need that maybe I'm not thinking about in this meeting? So definitely run your headline and your top 3 messages. If it's a really important meeting and you're not sure, run it by a few people. Do a few practices. Hey, lean on your colleagues to really make sure that, your meetings are effective and people are getting something out of it, because you know what, I tell you what, you do some of these things and you have a really great presentation, people will want to come to your meetings in the future because they know they're going to get something out of it. So that concludes my slides. I am going to put a survey in the chat. So I'm supposed to ask you to survey and tell me how I did. Let's see if there's any questions here. PTSA, that was a good point. Anyone else have a question or a comment? Anything at all? You have my attention. And like I said, we do media training, presentation training, messaging workshops. Is there anything that I can help you with as you go into maybe presentations in the future? How do you present agendas? So what I do ahead of time is I, when I send the Zoom link out, I do create an agenda for meetings and make sure that it's very simple, right? Don't have to have all the words of everything I'm giving in the presentation, just top 5 headlines. And again, Same thing as messaging, right? You don't need 50,000 topics for one meeting. If you can accomplish 3 things in a meeting, huge, huge accomplishment. Put people, give people the power to really tackle 1 or 2 things in a meeting. I do believe that they're going to be providing the presentation in full after this. Is that correct, Lisa?
That's right. And I probably the presentation, the slides, as well as the recording. It may take a little while.
Good. Yeah. And I have no problem with anyone reaching out to me if you have additional questions after this. I have a very easy email address. It's long, but it's Debbie@FitzgeraldPeterson.com. Peterson has an S-E-N at the end. It's like I married my business partner and got this name I always have to correct. So Debbie@FitzgeraldPeterson.com. So certainly let me know if you have additional questions afterwards. But is there any other questions? Anything else you guys have? Do you recommend someone handle chat monitoring during PTA meetings? Yes, yes. You can't do it all, right? So it's always good. I also really don't like running my own slides. Clearly, Lisa has done an awesome job today in making sure that my slides are running. No, you have, Lisa. I get distracted and it kind of stresses me out. So I always like to ask someone, hey, will you run my slides? It's easy. I'll just say next slide. Sometimes they get stuck. It's okay. No worries. And then yes, I have someone handling the chat, and I also have someone taking notes. I can't do it all, right? So if you're taking notes, you're monitoring the chat, you're doing everything, you're not going to be successful. So have friends do that stuff for you. Meeting notes, you probably have a secretary anyway in some of these meetings who do that. So that actually really helps. And then the chat monitoring is awesome. Someone who's there saying, well, wait a minute, we have a question, especially if questions are interspersed throughout your presentation. What do you suggest as good background for presenter? As far as the background goes here, I think traditional office, a library of books, things that aren't moving, places where people are not coming in and out. I put my shade down over here, but could use a little less light in here. You know, it's also funny. My kids make fun of me. They call it an old person selfie. But when, I don't know, I think personally, when I sit down a little bit and the camera is angled down, I look a little younger. I mean, that is so vain, but I look a little better and I feel a little bit more confident. So however you feel confident, right? I'm not going to apologize for that. If I feel more confident, I'm going to give a better presentation. Also, background, got to be careful with logos. We tell clients this all the time. If you're doing a media interview, especially, but if you're doing a presentation and you don't want to distract people with, boy, it can be anything, political beliefs, offensive photos, things that other people might think are offensive, but you don't. I just do a once over sometimes. I never know what my kids are doing or what's going on back here sometimes. I'm like, did I put a joke back here that's going to offend someone? This is all boring stuff. It doesn't even matter. So, but it's, you know, your background can be interesting. I do have people sometimes put those backgrounds of the beach, a calming beach. I find that to be a little distracting myself. I think it's just great to have an office background or even just a picture. Make it simple. Keep it simple. Anything else? Oh, there it is. Oh, good. Okay. There's a workshop evaluation. Well, this has been wonderful. I so appreciate the opportunity. And again, don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. And I am very proud to represent McDonald's today. So really appreciate all that you guys have done for all of the kids and parents and PTA. So I'm honored to be here today. Thank you so much.
And Debbie, I just want, on behalf of PTA, want to thank you for your partnership and for this terrific presentation. And I took some notes for I have a few minutes to speak tomorrow, and I'm going to practice and I'm going to do my headlining. But Really do appreciate this. And I do appreciate everything technical thing that could go wrong on my end happened. And so it showed the,
it was all planned, right? It was all planned.
exactly, exactly. So you showed how you can just surf through technical difficulties, and I appreciate that. One last chance for any other questions, and then you can have a little bit of a break between Zoom calls, which I think is another really important thing. If people get Zoom calls stacked up, to have a little time to breathe in between.
That's right. Grab a drink and use the facilities. And you know what, Lisa, you made such a good point. If we can't laugh at ourselves during these times, what good are we, right? If there's a technical issue or something you think just went horribly wrong, oh my gosh, it's happening 80,000 times a day. I promise you that. This has gone so smoothly. I have been on Zoom calls that would make your toes curl. There was one I was on where a couple was fighting and they didn't know their microphone was on. And it was so embarrassing for them. And we were all just like, oh gosh, what else could happen today? I thought I've seen everything. So, hey, if you get through the day and there's just a couple of frozen slides, you're doing great. You're doing it.
Hey, Debbie, I've always had a hard copy of what I was going to show just in case that doesn't show. And I've literally held it up to the camera to show people. And then I talk about, I mean, you get to a point where you do what you got to do.
That is such a great tip. Heck yeah, we can't control technology. Technology is the bane of my existence. My gosh, about the time I think everything's all set up perfectly, something doesn't work. So Deb, great point. You have the slides right there. Who cares? Who cares if you hold it up and that's the way they see it? They'll probably remember your Zoom meeting forever. They'll probably remember what you said more. So go with the flow, laugh at yourself, have a good time, and people will walk away with more good feelings about your presentation than ever.